The small town of Kilbride in Western Ireland was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody. Nothing ever really changed there. The same families had lived on the same streets for generations, and the church bells rang at the same time every single day. Right at the edge of town stood an old stone convent called St. Catherine's. It had been there for over 100 years, and the gray walls had seen countless women come and go. Through its heavy wooden doors inside those walls lived a nun who had spent more than 3 decades in quiet service. Her name was Sister Margaret, and she was 61 years old. She had soft gray eyes that always seemed to be looking at something far away, something nobody else could see. Other nuns respected her deeply, but none of them could say they truly knew her. She was kind to everyone and always ready to help, but there was a wall around her heart that nobody had ever been able to break through. Sister Margaret woke up every morning at 5. She prayed in the chapel before sunrise, and then she worked in the garden until breakfast. After that, she helped in the kitchen and spent her afternoons visiting the sick and the villager. Routine never changed. Day after day and year after year she followed the same path, but sometimes late at night when the convent was silent and everyone else was asleep, the other sisters would hear something. Strange footsteps, soft and slow, moving through the hallways. It was Sister Margaret walking alone in the darkness. Never told anyone where she went or what she was doing, and nobody ever asked. One cold evening in October, everything began to change. The convent received a large donation from a wealthy family in Dublin. Along with the money came something unexpected. A grand piano. It was a beautiful instrument made of dark polished wood with ivory keys that gleamed under the light. The men who delivered it placed it in the main hall, and everyone gathered around to admire it. Everyone except Sister Margaret. She stood at the back of the room with her hands clasped tightly together. Her face had gone pale, and her breathing was shallow. One of the younger nuns noticed and walked over to her. "You all right?" Sister Margaret forced a small smile and nodded. "I am fine, child, just a bit tired." But she was not fine. The moment she saw that piano, something inside her cracked open. Memories she had buried for over 40 years came rushing back like a flood. She excused herself and walked quickly to her small room. At the end of the corridor, she closed the door behind her and sat on the edge of her bed. Her hands were shaking. She looked down at her fingers. They were older now, wrinkled and worn from years of work. But once upon a time, those same fingers had danced across piano keys with a speed and grace that left audiences breathless. That was another life, a life she had tried so hard to forget. Her real name was not always Sister Margaret. Before she took her vows, she had been known as Maggie O'Brien, and Maggie O'Brien had been a star. She was born in a tiny village not far from Kilbride. Her family was poor, but her mother had somehow managed to save enough money to buy an old second-hand piano. It was out of tune and missing a few keys, but to young Maggie, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. She taught herself to play by listening to songs on the radio and copying them note by note. By the time she was 10 years old, she could play better than most adults. Word spread quickly about the little girl with the magic fingers. A music teacher from the city heard about her and offered to give her free lessons. He said she had a gift that came along once in a generation. Maggie practiced every single day. She played until her fingers ached, and then she played some more. By the time she was 17, she had won every competition in the country scouts. From famous music schools came to watch her perform. They all said the same thing: "This girl is going to be a legend." But Maggie did not care about fame or money. She played because she loved it and because of her little brother. His name was Thomas, and he was 5 years younger than her. He had been born with weak lungs and spent most of his childhood in bed. The doctors said he would not live past 20. But whenever Maggie played the piano, Thomas would smile. His pale face would light up, and for a few moments, he would forget about the pain. "Play another one, Maggie," he would say, "just one more." And she always did. She would play for hours just to see him happy. Thomas was her best friend, and her biggest fan. He believed in her more than anyone else in the world. When Maggie turned 19, she received the news she had been waiting for her whole life. A famous music academy in Vienna had offered her a full scholarship. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Night before her first big performance at the National Concert Hall in Dublin, her whole family came to see her, except Thomas. He had been feeling unwell that week, but he insisted he would be there. "I would not miss it for the world, Maggie." He told her he will be in the front row cheering louder than anyone. She hugged him tight and made him promise to rest until it was time to leave. That evening, the concert hall was packed. Over 1,000 people had come to see the young prodigy. Everyone was talking about Maggie. Sat backstage in her beautiful blue dress, her heart was pounding with excitement. She peeked through the curtain and scanned the crowd. The front row was empty. Thomas was not there yet. She told herself not to worry. He was probably just running late. The host announced her name, and she walked onto the stage. The audience erupted in applause. She sat down at the grand piano and placed her fingers on the keys. But before she could play the first notes, someone rushed onto the stage and whispered something in her ear. The color drained from her face. She stood up so fast that the piano bench fell over behind her. She ran off the stage without saying a word. Thomas had been in a car accident. He was on his way to the concert when a truck ran a red light and crashed into the car he was riding in. By the time Maggie reached the hospital, it was too late. Her little brother was gone. He died with a smile on his face, they told her. He kept saying he could not wait to hear his sister play. Maggie collapsed on the hospital floor and screamed until her voice gave out. She blamed herself. If she had not been so focused on her stupid concert, Thomas would still be alive. He would have stayed home where he was safe. It was her fault, all her fault. She never played the piano again. She gave up her scholarship and disappeared from the music world. For months she wandered from place to place, unable to find peace. And then one rainy night she found herself standing at the gates of St. Catherine's Convent. She knocked on the door and begged them to let her in. She wanted to hide from the world. She wanted to forget who she used to be. Nuns took her in and gave her a new name, Sister Margaret. For 42 years she kept her secret buried deep inside. She never spoke of Thomas. She never mentioned the piano. She built a wall around her heart so thick that even she could not break through it. And now, standing in her small room with her hands still trembling, she realized that wall was starting to crumble. The piano in the main hall was calling to her. Every time she walked past it, she could feel its pull. At night, she dreamed of Thomas sitting beside her on the old piano bench back home. "Play for her." And Maggie, he would whisper. Just one more song. She would wake up with tears streaming down her face. She did not know how much longer she could resist. Something was changing inside her, and deep down she knew that her quiet life was about to be turned upside down. 2 weeks had passed since the piano arrived at St. Catherine's Convent. Sister Margaret had done everything she could to avoid it. She took longer routes through the building, just so she would not have to walk past the main hall. She volunteered for extra duties in the garden and the kitchen, anything to keep herself busy, anything to keep her mind away from those ivory keys. But no matter how hard she tried, the piano was always there, waiting for her. The convent was buzzing with excitement because something big was about to happen. Mother Superior had announced that they would be hosting a charity gala to raise money for the local orphanage. The orphanage had been struggling for years, and many of the children there had nowhere else to go. This gala was their best hope. Invitations had been sent out to wealthy donors and important people from all over the country. Local officials and business owners had confirmed they would attend. Even a few politicians had promised to make an appearance. The tickets sold out within days. Everyone wanted to be part of this special night. The nuns worked day and night to prepare. They cleaned every corner of the convent until it sparkled. They decorated the main hall with flowers and candles. They arranged tables covered in white cloth and set out the finest dishes they had. Everything had to be perfect. At the center of it all, sat the grand piano. It had been polished until it shone like a mirror. A professional pianist from Dublin had been hired to perform. During the evening, she was a well-known musician who had played at famous venues all over Europe. Her music would be the highlight of the night. Sister Margaret tried not to think about it. She focused on her tasks and kept her head down. But late at night, when she lay in her bed, she could not escape the memories. She saw Thomas smiling at her from across the room. She heard his voice asking her to play just one more song. She woke up every morning with red eyes and a heavy heart. The day before the gala, everything fell apart. Mother Superior received a phone call that changed everything. The pianist from Dublin had fallen seriously ill. She had been taken to the hospital, and the doctor said she would not be able to travel. There was no way she could perform. Mother Superior hung up the phone and sat down slowly. Her face had turned pale. This was a disaster. The gala was less than 24 hours away. 300 guests were expecting a night of beautiful music. Without the pianist, the entire evening would be ruined. She called an emergency meeting with the senior nuns. They sat around the long wooden table in the meeting room and tried to come up with a solution. Could they find another pianist on such short notice? They made phone calls to every musician they knew, but it was hopeless. Everyone was either busy or too far away to make it in time. One of the nuns suggested they play recorded music instead, but Mother Superior shook her head. That would not be the same. The donors had been promised a live performance. They could not let them down. The room fell silent. Nobody knew what to do then. One of the older nuns spoke up. Her name was Sister Bernadette, and she had been at the convent for almost as long as Sister Margaret. She was the only one who remembered the rumors from many years ago. There might be someone who can help, she said quietly. Mother Superior looked at her with tired eyes. Who's Sister Bernadette hesitated for a moment. Sister Margaret. The room went still. What do you mean, Mother Superior? Asked Sister Bernadette. Took a deep breath. When Sister Margaret first came to us over 40 years ago, there were whispers. Some of the older nuns who have since passed away used to say that she had been a famous pianist before she took her vows. They said she gave it all up because of something terrible that happened. I never asked her about it because it seemed too painful, but I have always wondered if it was true. Mother Superior leaned back in her chair. She had known Sister Margaret for decades. She had never once seen her show any interest in music. Could it really be true? There is only one way to find out, she said. That evening, Mother Superior went looking for Sister Margaret. She found her in the chapel, sitting alone in the front pew. The last light of the setting sun came through the stained glass windows and painted the stone floor in shades of red and gold. Sister Margaret was praying with her eyes closed and her hands folded in her lap. Mother Superior sat down beside her and waited. After a few minutes, Sister Margaret opened her eyes. She did not seem surprised to see her there. Mother Superior, she said softly, is something wrong? Mother Superior did not answer right away. She studied the older nun's face and saw the weariness in her eyes. Margaret, she began gently, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Sister Margaret's body tensed. She already knew what was coming. The pianist we hired for tomorrow has fallen ill. Mother Superior continued. She cannot perform. We have tried everything, but there is no one else available. I have heard stories, Margaret, stories from long ago. Is it true that you once played the piano? Sister Margaret felt her heart stop. For a moment she could not breathe. The secret she had kept hidden for so many years was suddenly out in the open. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to say that the stories were wrong, but she could not lie on. Here in this sacred place, it was a long time ago. She whispered, I am not that person anymore. Mother Superior reached over and took her hand. Understand that something painful happened to you. I will not ask you to tell me what it was, but Margaret, those children at the orphanage are counting on us. This gala could change their lives. Please. Sister Margaret pulled her hand away and stood up. She walked to the altar and stood there with her back turned. You do not understand, she said. Her voice was shaking. The last time I played, someone I loved died. I made a promise to myself that I would never touch a piano again. I break that promise. I do not know what will happen. I do not know if I can survive it." Mother Superior stood up and walked over to her. She placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I cannot imagine the pain you have carried all these years," she said, "but hiding from it has not made it go away, has it?" Sister Margaret did not answer. "Maybe," Mother Superior continued, "maybe it is time to stop running. Maybe. This is not a punishment, but a gift, a chance to heal." Sister Margaret shook her head. "I cannot. I am sorry." She walked out of the chapel and did not look back that night. Sister Margaret could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Moonlight came through her small window and cast shadows on the walls. Her mind was racing with memories she had tried so hard to forget. She saw herself as a young girl sitting at the old piano in her family's tiny house. She saw Thomas lying in his bed, too weak to get up, but smiling every time she played. She saw the concert hall in Dublin filled with 1,000 people waiting to hear her. She saw the empty front row seat where her brother was supposed to be, and she saw the hospital room where she held his cold hand and said goodbye. The tears came, and she did not try to stop them. She cried until there was nothing left. Then somewhere in the stillness she heard a voice. It was faint like a whisper carried by the wind, but she knew that voice. She would know it anywhere. "Play for me, Maggie," it said. "Just one more song." She sat up in bed and looked around the room. There was no one there, but she could feel him. She could feel Thomas with her in that moment. She got out of bed and knelt on the cold stone floor. She folded her hands and began to pray. She prayed for guidance. She prayed for strength. She prayed for forgiveness. And as the first light of dawn began to creep through her window, something shifted inside her. The weight she had been carrying for 42 years did not disappear, but it felt lighter somehow. She stood up and walked to her door. She opened it and stepped out into the quiet hallway. Her feet carried her forward without hesitation. She knew where she needed to go. A few minutes later, she knocked on Mother Superior's door. Older woman opened it with tired eyes. She had not slept either. Sister Margaret stood there in the early morning light. Her face was calm. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was something new in them, something that had not been there before. "I will do it," she said. "I will play." The morning of the gala arrived with a cold gray sky hanging over Kilbride. Sister Margaret stood at her window and watched the clouds move slowly across the horizon. She had barely slept, but somehow she felt more awake than she had in years. Her decision to play had set something in motion inside her, something she could not stop, even if she wanted to. She washed her face with cold water and looked at herself in the small mirror above the sink. The woman staring back at her was old. Hair had turned white long ago, and her skin was lined with the marks of time, but her eyes looked different this morning. There was a spark in them that had been missing for 4 decades. She wondered if this was what courage felt like, or maybe it was fear. Perhaps they were the same thing. She got dressed in her usual habit and made her way to the chapel for morning prayers. The other nuns were already there, sitting in their usual places. When Sister Margaret walked in, a few of them glanced at her with curious eyes. Word had spread quickly about what she had agreed to do. Nobody said anything, but she could feel their questions hanging in the air. After prayers, Mother Superior asked her to stay behind. The two women sat together in the empty chapel. As the morning light grew stronger, "I want you to know that you do not have to go through with this," Mother Superior said. "If it is too much, I will understand. We can find another way." Sister Margaret shook her head slowly. "No," she said, "I need to do this. I have been hiding for too long. Whatever happens tonight, I cannot run away anymore." Mother Superior nodded and took her hand. "Then I will be praying for you every moment. You will not be alone up there, even if it feels like you are." Those words stayed with Sister Margaret as she walked through the convent. Main hall had been transformed overnight. The long tables were covered in white linen and decorated with candles and fresh flowers. Crystal glasses sparkled under the light of the chandeliers that hung from the high ceiling. Everything looked like something from a dream. There at the front of the room sat the grand piano. Sister Margaret stopped in the doorway and stared and her heart began to beat faster. The instrument was beautiful, its dark wood gleamed, and the ivory keys seemed to glow. She had not been this close to a piano in 42 years. Her fingers tingled with a strange mixture of longing and terror. One of the younger nuns came up beside her. "It is magnificent, is it not?" she said cheerfully. "I cannot wait to hear you play." "Sister Margaret, everyone is talking about it." Sister Margaret managed a small smile, but inside she felt like she might be sick. What if she had forgotten how to play? What if her fingers no longer remembered what to do? What if she sat down at that piano and nothing came out? She pushed those thoughts away and went back to her room. She needed to be alone. She needed to prepare. Hours passed slowly. Sister Margaret spent most of the day in silence. She did not eat lunch. She could not. Her stomach was tied in knots. She sat on her bed and closed her eyes. She tried to remember what it felt like to play. She imagined her fingers moving across the keys. She heard the music in her mind. Chopping that was the piece she had been playing the night Thomas died. Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano. It required perfect technique and deep emotion. She had spent years mastering it, but that was so long ago. Could she still do it? Did she even have the right to try? As the afternoon turned to evening, the guests began to arrive. Sister Margaret could hear the sounds of cars pulling up outside. Voices filled the hallways. Laughter echoed through the stone walls. She stayed in her room and listened. At 6 o'clock, there was a knock on her door. Was Sister Bernadette. The old nun looked at her with kind eyes. "It is almost time," she said gently. "How are you feeling, sister?" Margaret stood up and smoothed down her habit. "I do not know," she admitted. "I feel like I am about to jump off a cliff, sister." Bernadette stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. Sister Margaret nodded. "When I was young, I wanted to be a singer, sister." Bernadette said, "I had a voice that people said was touched by angels, but I was terrified of performing. Every time I had to sing in front of others, I would freeze." One day, my grandmother told me something I have never forgotten. She said that fear is not the enemy. Fear is just excitement wearing a disguise. When you feel afraid, it means you are about to do something that matters. Sister Margaret let those words sink in. Maybe her grandmother was right. Maybe this fear she was feeling was not a warning to stop. Maybe it was a sign that she was finally ready to face what she had been running from. "Thank you," she whispered. Sister Bernadette smiled and opened the door. "Now come, 300 people are waiting for you." They walked together through the winding corridors of the convent. Sister Margaret could hear the noise growing louder as they approached the main hall. Her legs felt weak, but she kept moving forward. When they reached the entrance, she stopped and looked inside. Room was packed. Men in expensive suits and women in elegant dresses filled every table. Waiters moved between them carrying trays of food and glasses of wine. At the front of the room, the children from the orphanage sat in neat rows. They were dressed in their best clothes. Some of them looked nervous. Others looked excited. They had no idea what was about to happen. Neither did anyone else. Mother Superior was standing near the stage. When she saw Sister Margaret, she walked over quickly. "Are you ready?" she asked. Sister Margaret took a deep breath. "No," she said honestly, "but I am going to do it anyway." Mother Superior squeezed her arm. "That is all any of us can do." The room began to quiet down as people took their seats. Mother Superior walked up to the small stage at the front of the hall. She stood beside the grand piano and waited for silence. "Good evening, everyone," she began. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Your generosity will change the lives of the children at St. Joseph's Orphanage. We are so grateful for your support." She paused and looked out at the crowd. "As many of you know, our scheduled performer was unable to join us due to illness, but we are blessed to have someone very special who has agreed to play for us tonight. She is a member of our community here at St. Catherine's, has dedicated her life to prayer and service, and tonight she will share a gift that she has kept hidden for many, many years. Please welcome Sister Margaret." The crowd applauded politely, but there was confusion on many faces. People exchanged glances. A nun playing piano at a formal gala. This was not what they had expected. Sister Margaret stepped out from the side of the room. She walked slowly toward the stage. Every step felt like it took an eternity. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her, judging her, doubting her. She kept her gaze fixed on the piano. That was all that mattered now, just her and the instrument. When she reached the stage, she stood beside the piano for a moment. She looked out at the crowd and saw the skeptical expressions. She saw the whispered comments behind raised hands. She saw the children from the orphanage staring at her with wide, curious eyes. One small boy in the front row caught her attention. He had messy brown hair and a thin, pale face. He reminded her of Thomas. The boy smiled at her. It was a small, shy smile, but it was real. Something in Sister Margaret's chest loosened. She smiled back at him. Then she turned and sat down on the piano bench. The room fell silent. Sister Margaret placed her hands on her lap and closed her eyes. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She could feel the weight of 42 years pressing down on her shoulders. She thought of Thomas. She saw his face so clearly. It was like he was sitting right beside her. "I'm scared," she whispered inside her mind. "I know." His voice came back to her, soft and warm. "But I am here, Maggie. I have always been here." She opened her eyes. She lifted her hands and placed her fingers on the keys. Ivory felt cool and smooth beneath her touch. It was familiar, like coming home after a long journey. She took one final breath, and then she began to play. The first note rang out into the silence like a single drop of rain falling into a still pond. It was soft and pure, and it hung in the air for just a moment before fading away. Sister Margaret felt it vibrate through her fingers and travel up her arms into her chest. It had been 42 years since she had played. 42 years of silence. But her hands remembered. They remembered everything. The second note followed the first, then a third, then a fourth. Slowly, carefully, she began to build the opening phrases of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The melody was gentle at first, like a whisper, like a secret being shared between old friends. In the audience, people shifted in their seats. Few of them leaned forward with curious expressions. They had expected something simple, maybe a hymn or a folk song, something fitting for an elderly nun who probably learned to play as a hobby. But this was different. This was something else entirely. Sister Margaret kept her eyes closed as she played. She did not need to see the keys. Her fingers knew exactly where to go. They moved across the piano with a grace that seemed impossible for someone her age. The music grew stronger. The notes came faster. What had started as a gentle stream was becoming a river. The sound filled every corner of the great hall. It bounced off the stone walls and the high ceiling. It wrapped around the guests like an invisible embrace. A woman in a red dress stopped mid-conversation with her mouth still open. A man in a gray suit set down his wine glass and stared at the stage. Even the waiters froze in place, unable to move. Nobody had expected this. Nobody had imagined that the quiet old nun could play like this. Sister Margaret was no longer in the room. She was somewhere else entirely. She was back in her childhood, home, sitting at the old broken piano with Thomas beside her. She could feel his small body pressed against her side. She could hear his breathing slow and steady as he listened. Play the sad one, Maggie. He used to say, the one that sounds like rain. This was that piece. This was the music Thomas loved most. She had played it for him 100 times, 1,000 times, and every single time he would close his eyes and smile. The memory was so vivid it almost broke her, but she did not stop. She could not stop. Music had taken over. It was pouring out of her like water from a broken dam. All the grief she had kept locked inside for 4 decades was finally being released. The middle section of the ballade arrived with a crash of powerful chords. Sister Margaret's hands flew across the keys with a speed that made people gasp. The music was wild now. It was angry and passionate and full of pain. It told the story of everything she had lost, her dreams, her brother, her entire life. Tears began to stream down her face. But she did not wipe them away. She let them fall onto her habit and onto the keys. She let them become part of the music. In the front row, the small boy with messy brown hair watched her with wide eyes. He had never heard anything like this before. He did not understand the complicated patterns of the music. He did not know the name of the composer or the history of the piece, but he understood the feeling behind it. He could feel the sadness and the longing. He could feel the love it made his own. Chest ache in a way he could not explain. Beside him, the other children from the orphanage sat perfectly still. None of them moved or whispered or fidgeted the way children usually do. They were completely captured by what they were hearing. At one of the back tables, an elderly man with silver hair reached up and removed his glasses. He wiped his eyes with a handkerchief and put them back on. His wife noticed and took his hand without saying a word. She was crying too. All around the room, people were having the same experience. The music was reaching inside them and touching something deep. Something they had forgotten was there. Regrets they had buried, people they had lost, chances they had never taken. Sister Margaret played on the ballad, moved into its final section. The melody returned, but it was different now. It was heavier, more urgent, like a heart beating faster and faster as it approaches the end. Her fingers danced across the highest keys, creating notes that sparkled like stars. Then they plunged down to the lowest keys, creating sounds that rumbled like thunder. The music built and built until it felt like the whole room might burst, and then silence. The final chord faded into nothing. Sister Margaret sat perfectly still with her hands hovering above the keys. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Her face was wet with tears. Her whole body was trembling. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. The silence was so complete that you could hear the candles flickering on the tables. 300 people sat frozen in their seats. They were not sure what they had just witnessed. It felt like something sacred, something that was not meant for ordinary eyes and ears. Then from the front row came a sound. It was the small boy he had gotten to. His feet, his thin arms were raised above his head, and he was clapping. The sound of his small hands coming together echoed through the silent hall. 1 clap, 2 claps, 3 claps. Then the girl beside him stood up and joined him. Then another child and another. Within seconds, all the children from the orphanage were on their feet, clapping as hard as they could. Their faces were shining with something that looked like joy. The adults in the room seemed to wake up from a spell. A woman in the second row stood up, then a man across the aisle, then an entire table at once. The applause spread through the room like wildfire. People were not just clapping, they were cheering. They were wiping tears from their faces and shouting words of praise. The sound grew louder and louder until it shook the chandeliers. Sister Margaret finally opened her eyes. She looked out at the crowd and saw them all standing. Every single person in the room was on their feet. For her, for the music, for the brother she had finally honored after all these years. She tried to stand, but her legs would not cooperate. She had given everything she had to that performance. There was nothing left. Mother Superior rushed to the stage and helped her to her feet. She held Sister Margaret's arm and steadied her as the applause continued. "You did it, Mother Superior whispered in her ear. "Margaret, you did it." Sister Margaret could not speak. She could barely breathe, but somewhere deep inside her chest, she felt something shift. The weight she had carried for 42 years was not gone. It would never be completely gone, but it was lighter now, so much lighter. She had finally done what she promised herself she would never do. She had played again, and she had survived. More than survived. She had set something free, something beautiful. The applause went on for nearly 5 minutes. People stamped their feet and called out for more. But Sister Margaret shook her head gently. She had played the only piece that mattered. There would be no encore. Not tonight. Mother Superior helped her down from the stage. As they walked past the front row, the small boy with messy brown hair reached out and grabbed her hand. Sister Margaret stopped and looked down. At him his eyes were red, and his cheeks were wet. That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard, he said in a small voice. It made me feel like everything is going to be okay. Sister Margaret knelt down, so she was at his level. She looked into his fineless eyes and saw something familiar. The same hope she used to see in Thomas. The same innocence. The same belief that the world could be good. "Thank you," she whispered to him. "You reminded me of someone very special." The boy did not understand what she meant, but he smiled anyway, and for the first time in 42 years, Sister Margaret felt like maybe she had done something right. Maybe Thomas would have been proud of her after all. Maybe he had been watching the whole time, waiting for her to find her way. Back to the music, back to herself, back to him. The night of the gala changed everything by the time the last guest left St. Catherine's Convent. The donation box was overflowing. People had given more money than anyone had expected. Some wrote checks on the spot. Others promised to send more in the coming weeks. The final count came in 3 days later. Gala had raised enough money to keep the orphanage running for the next 5 years. There would be new beds for the children, new books for the schoolroom, clothes and shoes and warm coats for the winter. The news spread through the town like sunshine after a long storm. But the money was only part of the story. What people could not stop talking about was Sister Margaret. Within days, her performance had become the stuff of legend. Those who had been there told their friends and family about the old nun who played piano like an angel. They described how the room fell silent, how grown men wept openly, how the children stood up first to applaud. The story grew bigger with each telling. Reporters from the city came to Kilbride, hoping to interview her. They wanted to know who she really was. They wanted to uncover the mystery of the nun with the secret past, but Sister Margaret refused to speak to any of them. She had not played for fame or attention. She had played for Thomas. She had played for herself. She had played to finally set free the grief she had carried for more than 4 decades. That was enough. The days after the gala were quiet for Sister Margaret. She returned to her usual routine of prayer and work and service. But something was different. Now the other nuns looked at her with new eyes. They smiled at her more often. They asked her questions about her past. She answered some of them, not all but enough. For the first time since she arrived at the convent, she did not feel like she was hiding. She felt like she belonged. 1 week after the gala, Mother Superior came to see her with a request. The children at the orphanage had been asking about her. They wanted to know if she would come visit them. They wanted to hear her play again. Sister Margaret was hesitant at first. She had spent so many years avoiding the piano. The thought of playing regularly still frightened her. But then she remembered the small boy with messy brown hair. She remembered the look on his face when he told her that her music made him feel like everything would be okay. How could she say no to that? Next morning, she walked to the orphanage. It was a short distance from the convent, just down the hill and across a narrow stone bridge. The building was old and worn, but the windows were clean, and there were flowers planted by the front door. When she stepped inside, the children rushed to greet her. They surrounded her with excited voices and eager hands. Sister Margaret, will you play for us? Please play for us," she laughed. It was a sound she had almost forgotten how to make. The orphanage had an old, upright piano in the corner of the common room. It was nothing like the grand piano at the convent. The wood was scratched, and some of the keys stuck when you pressed them. But when Sister Margaret sat down and began to play, it sounded just as beautiful. She played simple songs at first, melodies the children could hum along to. She watched their faces light up as the music filled the room. Some of them danced, others closed their eyes and swayed. The smallest ones crawled into her lap and pressed their tiny hands against the keys. It was chaos. It was messy. It was perfect. From that day on, Sister Margaret visited the orphanage every week. She played for the children and taught them simple tunes. She showed them how to read notes and how to feel a rhythm in their hearts. Some of them had natural talent. Others struggled to play even the easiest songs. But it did not matter. What mattered was that they were learning, they were growing, they were finding joy in something new. The small boy with messy brown hair became her most devoted student. His name was Daniel, and he was 9 years old. He had been at the orphanage since he was a baby. He had no memory of his parents and no family to call his own, but he had music now. He practiced every single day. His fingers were clumsy at first, but he refused to give up. Sister Margaret saw so much of Thomas in him, the same determination, the same quiet strength. Same way his whole face changed when he heard a melody he loved. One afternoon as the sun was setting, Daniel asked her a question. Sister Margarete said softly, "Why did you stop playing for so long?" She looked at him for a moment. She could have given him a simple answer. She could have changed the subject, but she decided to tell him the truth. "I had a little brother once," she said. "He was very sick and he loved music. More than anything in the world, I used to play for him every day. When he died, I blamed myself. I thought if I had not been so focused on my dreams, he would still be alive. So I gave up the piano. I gave up everything." Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he reached over and took her hand. "That is very sad," he said, "but I am glad you started playing again, because now you play for us, and it makes us feel like we have a family." Sister Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. She squeezed his hand gently. "You do have a family," she told him. "You have each other, and you have me." That night, Sister Margaret returned to the convent. As the stars began to appear in the sky, she walked slowly, taking her time. The air was cool and fresh, and it smelled like rain. She thought about Thomas. She thought about all the years she had wasted hiding from her grief. She thought about the children at the orphanage and how much joy they had brought into her life. For so long she had believed that playing the piano was a betrayal of her brother's memory. She had convinced herself that her music was the reason he died. But now she understood the truth. Her music was not the cause of his death. It was the thing that had connected them most deeply. By giving it up, she had not honored Thomas. She had silenced the one thing that kept his spirit alive. Now every time she played, she could feel him with Heron. The notes in the melodies, in the silence between the chords. He had never really left. He had just been waiting for her to find her. Way back. Months passed, and then years. Sister Margaret continued to teach at the orphanage until she was well into her 70s. She watched the children grow up and leave. Some went on to become musicians themselves. Others found different paths, but all of them carried a piece of her music with them wherever they went. Daniel was adopted by a kind couple from Dublin when he was 12. On his last day at the orphanage, he played a song for Sister Margaret. It was Chopin, the same ballad she had performed at the gala all those years ago. He made mistakes. His timing was not perfect, but it was beautiful. When he finished, he looked at her with tears in his eyes. "This is for you," he said, "and for your brother." Sister Margaret held him tight and whispered a prayer of thanks. She had lost so much in her life, but she had also been given so much in return, and in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the pain, not the grief, but the love that remained, the love that never died, the love that lived on in every note she played until her very last breath.